Well, there you
There, I
go.
got it. Okay, there
Oh,
was in December, I took a picture of a whole group of
lovely.
gems for our newsletter. Uh, so I've got lots of gems. I've got about 60,000 of them now. So I'm going to be in this business till I'm at least 107. So unless somebody wants to buy me out. But to give you a little background, I've been in the business now over 54 years. 50 years I've been in Afghanistan as of last July. And recently, the last 3 years, I was doing a lot of work with USAID. We actually started a brochure catalog for all the Afghans where they could put their picture in, their information and photos of the gems they had. And we had everything going really smoothly, including we were setting up a program in Dubai because for the first time the Israelis could come to Dubai. So
Wow.
we had over $48 million worth of emeralds being transferred from Afghanistan legally through the Ministry of Mines to Dubai for buyers from India and Israel primarily, because the Sri Lankans couldn't come, the Brazilians had trouble, the Thai people were having trouble. Anyway, we were all excited, and it was to be held on the 12th of July. On the 2nd of July, Dubai sent a message to Israel, please delay visas because of COVID. So we had to cancel or delay it until 2 November. Well, by then the Taliban had taken over, so it never happened. So and the USAID had to close all their programs now. So that was what happened the last 2 years. And I right now cannot go to Afghanistan because of the Taliban control, but I am planning and working heavily on a program to go to Tajikistan. And I used to, in the old days, whoops, it's going ahead of me here, be able to go in from Tajikistan. But so we'll see what happens. Anyway, I do have this in inventory, a 70 carat emerald from Panjshir Valley. Just show you a little few pieces here. Oops, no, it's going the wrong way on me. Sorry. We have from Tajikistan a 51 carat ruby matching. These are carved by Uli Pauli in Eder Oberstein, Germany. And we've got our spinels from Tajikistan.
Oh,
And this is an Afghan ruby. A lot of people don't
what?
ruby. I can't even speak right. Emerald, a green ruby. This is something new. Anyway,
I was going to say, okay, I'll
yeah,
believe you.
really nice and clean. But we want you to know there's still really nice emeralds coming out of Afghanistan. And this is what I was doing at Tucson, running this stone around
Oh,
to find a buyer for this. It's 6.02 carat. The story behind this is long because I was in 1999 on the Chinese border of Tajikistan at the Snowy mine, and I got the rough, and I paid 15,000 for it, brought it back. Andy Gulick in San Diego, that some of you may know, cut the stone for me, and I sold it a month later to some good friends in Dallas. Well, they passed away 2 years ago, and their children called me last year during COVID and says, we want to sell the stone. Will you take it back? So I ended up buying it back. So right now I'm hitting the road trying to sell this stone, but it
my
is
God.
red.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Ooh,
There's another biggie, 586 carat cat's eye aquamarine. This is from Pech Valley in Afghanistan. And of course, we got all kinds of lapis coming
oh,
out of Afghanistan continually. And I have both rough and cut materials. But here's what I'm sitting on tonight. If any
oh
of
my
you'd like to
God.
come over, I will serve you dinner on a lapis
Oh
table.
my God.
So
Wow.
you can bring your pendant.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Whoops, wrong way again. And of course, here's a piece of rough lapis. I'm selling some of these. People can cut the rest of their lives on this piece. Make
Gorgeous.
little jewelry. So it's pretty stone.
22 pounds.
Now, if you want to watch my movie, we have it up on YouTube now. You can see, I don't know if you'll be able to get back to this later or not, but it's on the link is on the bottom here. If not, just send me an email to Mr. Gary77 at AOL.com and I'll send it to you. But it's a 52-minute movie that takes you to the lapis mines and to the emerald mines in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
This is Panjshir Valley, the entrance
Wow.
out of Afghanistan. It's a beautiful area. It's up about 6,000 feet, and the mines start at about 10 and go to about 14,000. And as I was saying
Cool.
earlier tonight, I made it up there, but it was a tough climb. Getting older doesn't help on these situations. If you want more information on this, you can see on the top right under the title there, I have the area where you can go and download the article from G&G that we wrote several years ago. In 2009, USAID sponsored a trip where we went to every emerald mine and every ruby mine in Afghanistan and took latitude, longitude, and altitude data for all the different mines and created and pasted them onto satellite photos. And so you can see there's a lot of spaces between these mine areas where there's potential emeralds and most likely will be. USGS just posted this online live, so you can also download that if you really want to do some serious researching into mining in Afghanistan.
Wow.
This is what the ruby mines look like. They've been doing a lot of digging. Of course, these started in the 1800s, the ruby mines. The emeralds they didn't really find until 1977. But you can see on the left side how they've been able to pit mine all the way up and down the various small hills in Jagdillik area. And there again, this is on my website too, that you can download the full article and read it. And then we did satellite maps of where the rubies are currently coming from. This is Nuristan. This is a little more difficult. Under any circumstances, I can't really recommend you taking a tourist trip here. It's pretty tough. We got poison fly bites and poison ivy, and I ended up with hepatitis and leishmaniasis, which is like an anthrax type of disease out of that. So been through a lot. Here's another area. This is where Kunzite and Tourmaline are coming from. This is Pech Valley. So it's quite rugged. And you're talking 13, 14,000 feet again on these mountains. But of course, now we've got the Taliban, so it's totally blocked off from the backside. Now, as we were talking earlier, this is the mine, the opening of the mine, I should say, that goes back over 7,000 years. And very large tunnels inside this mine. And it's also in the film that I have on the website of the Gem Hunter. But you can see all the scree coming down the mountain. Why they did that, I don't know, because when you're climbing up, you have to climb over that loose rock. And it's easy to slide down 3,000 or 4,000 feet if you misstep. Here's my new program. Seeing I can't go to Afghanistan, I'm working heavy on Tajikistan. I just talked to Dr. Shegley at Tucson, and we talked to G&G, and I'm going to do 2 articles or a combined one, whichever they decide, on the ruby and spinel mines of Tajikistan. Now, I've been there about 3 different times. This was primarily the route. I went over on the left side. This is Dushanbe, the capital of Afghanistan or Tajikistan. Follow the black line all the way down at the base is Kuilau. That's where the spinel mines have been since 101 BC. And then you go back up and you go to the west, which would be to your right, and that takes you to the Chinese border where Murghab is. And that's where that red ruby, as we started, came from, is the Murghab mines. I started this research probably 25 years ago, going to the Library of Congress, looking up Marco Polo's old books and Captain John Smith and a Danish explorer by Olesen and anything else I could find. And this is the Marco Polo map written in an old book by Ural. It's not in the new books, and it's been translated. And if you take your finger and put it in the center and go straight up till you kind of got a U-shaped path there, right above that, you'll see where they actually wrote in ruby mines. Can anybody see that? Anyway, it says ruby, but it really wasn't ruby. This goes back to the old days when they thought the spinels were rubies.
Yeah.
And here's the Olofson's map. You go take that U again and you go up only about 1/4 of an inch. You'll see it says Kuilau. And this map was completed in 1896. So this is how I ended up going and being able to find those mines. And it took me more than 10 years. I got to the Afghan side a couple times, but then for one reason or another, they were either fighting or the bridges were out or what, that I couldn't cross from Afghanistan into Tajikistan. And the old days, as it was written in Marco Polo's books, the mines were in Afghanistan. However, when they drew the Duran line between the British and the Russians, they moved the border from the mountaintop to the river. So that's why that mine is now in Tajikistan. So here's what the village looks like. Not a lot of people here. This is up at about 13,000 feet in Tajikistan. Now, I had to go through about 15 different people, from geologists at the universities to the interior minister to several of the geologists and everything, just to get to permission to even go this far. And when we got halfway to Korg, we went down and talked to the village chief because we didn't have his permission to go through his territory. And he says, no, you and your friend, who my friend was an ex-Russian soldier, and he says, you two are just spies, and I'm not going to let you go. So this is after 20 days of traveling, and sometimes 24 hours in a vehicle.
Oh my
And
God.
so we went back to our hotel and went to sleep because we were exhausted. Got up the next morning at 9 o'clock and went down to see what food we could find in a bazaar. We got down there, a fellow came up to us that spoke good English, and he immediately says, I'm a KGB officer in this area. And he says, you're not doing anything wrong, but would you come to the office with us? So we said, okay. Well, typical in this territory in Afghanistan, they serve you tea, they serve you cookies. And we sat there and talked, and his boss said, nah, we can't let you guys go out there 300 miles all by yourself, and we don't know what you're going to do. So we really left disappointed and went back and said, well, we'll stay overnight, but we'll leave the next morning. And the next morning when we went to get breakfast, the same fellow showed up, and he says, look, I'm a geologist, and I don't see any problem you taking pictures and traveling in our territory. Come back with me, and I'm going to try to convince my boss. So we went back and spent about an hour in the boss's office, and finally he says, okay, I'm going to let you go. And I said, yeah, but the village chief said no, and I certainly don't want to be in some hole in some prison you've got somewhere. Would you call him and give us permission? He said, okay. So he gets on the phone, and he's on that phone probably about 2 minutes, and all of a sudden he starts turning totally red in his face. And after about another 2 minutes, he just slammed the phone down real hard. He pointed at me and my friend and says, you two, you go anywhere you want in this country, you just let me know. That village chief said I had no power whatsoever. So we said, okay. And we got to the next day, we were like 200 miles away to the west, and nothing out there. And here's some barbed wire and a fence and a little tiny compound. I walked up and showed my passport, and the guard with his gun says, oh, Mr. Gary, come on in. We got food, we got place to sleep. So the word got around, saved our trip. But finally, when we got down to Kuilau, the old Spinel mines, I met this fellow, and strangely enough, I had been working and had correspondence with Lev Droskowski, who was a famous professor in Tajikistan and Russia, and had done all the geological work for Tajikistan. And Ali, who you met or see here in the picture, was his student. So boy, he just grabbed all his old maps and everything, and we spent 2 days with him. And the map that you see in my hand here, there's a picture of it close, had mapped the old Tajikistan spell mines and tunnels and where they were. The main mine is right there. Let's see, if you go over 1.5 inches and then go up, you can see just where patches of earth have been taken away. So it was in the side of the mountain there. But I didn't know about all these other tunnels that were marked on here. And he claimed that there were more than 408 tunnels
Oh
in
my
that
God.
mountain. Because as I said, this mine goes back to 101 BC, Timur's time and before, way before. So Ali asked me if I wanted to go in these tunnels. Well, they're like 3.5 feet wide and 3.5 feet high.
Oh
And
God.
I'm not a little tiny guy. My hips were hitting both sides and scratching material off. But every now and then, about 10 feet in or further, we would start seeing some places where you could stand up. And then there would be 5 or 6 tunnels leading to the right and the left and up and down.
Oh my
And
God.
we went through about 6 of these, of course, totally pitch black, except for the lanterns we had on our head. So
Oh my
finally
God.
I turned to Ollie. I says, look, because what he's doing is he's putting 3 rocks up like you see on the side here to mark our path as we go through here. So I said to him, unless you've got a long rope I can put on my ankle, I'm ready to go back for tea. I don't want to get lost in this mountain forever, because we were
God.
probably in 30, 40 yards at that point in time. But they have
Whoa.
found some
No.
very good material. If you read the old reports, I think even Chris Smith did a report, said the largest ruby they had found was like 1.5 carats to 2 carats. So this is a ruby, you're not a spinel, by the way. So anyway, I was able to get this, and there's a report out that you can go back and read if you're interested. It was the John Sinkankis seminar that
Okay.
I wrote up an article. And
Yeah.
of course, that's what you heard probably from Elizabeth too, Thornton. But, and then you held up my book there to show you that. And then I did, this was my first book, which is a lot more about the technology and the scientific data with the mines. And the other one's more, this one's my stories of traveling over there for 25 years at the time. As I mentioned, this is my 50th year. And this movie is available on the internet under YouTube. You can watch it for free. So what I can say is, because I'm trying to save a lot of time for questions for all of you, there's a few more bridges to cross in that area if we
Oh
get
my
rid of
God.
get rid of the Taliban. And I volunteered to go out and walk across this bridge rather than ride in the truck, because there
Right.
was a truck at the bottom of the hole already. I didn't
Oh,
want to be the second one. So
Oh my
now,
God.
in a little bit of a summary, you probably have been listening and you think I'm here to try to sell you those first gems or sell your books, but it's not really true. I really want to sell timeshare lots in Afghanistan. So your group here can be first to buy if you'd like. But now I'd like to
Oh,
invite any of you to come to Hawaii, because this is where I live in Honolulu. And my wife and
wow.
I have a house in Kona too. So come on over and go to the beach with us. And I'm willing to share any more data you've got. You can go to my website. And I want you to know I've just literally made a fortune in this business, to the point that you'll have to visit us in our penthouse.
Yeah.
So as you know, business has been pretty tough the last few years, although I kept traveling, but I'm sure the rest of you have found the same problem. So let's see if I can go back to, how do I find you again?
I can stop screen sharing if you want.
Okay, yep, that's good.
There we go.
There, okay.
Okay.
Wide open for questions.
That
Oh,
was
I have a
fabulous. I
question.
can't wait to read your book.
Okay,
I have a question.
yes.
Is also the weren't spinels known as Balas rubies, BALAS? And
Well,
it's
Balas ruby means false ruby. So
Ah.
yes, they were. You're correct in a way. But then when they started talking about synthetics, and then they've kind of said,
God.
no, maybe those were synthetic. But you know, it couldn't be in history before let's see, 1800s almost. They didn't know about synthetic rubies. 1800s they had them, but if yeah, right, good for you. Glad your memory's not that bad. You said you were cloudy.
Yeah.
But anyway, so if they were talking about the spinels in the earlier days, that means they weren't rubies, they were spinels. But you know, the Chinese books, if you take, what's his name? I'm trying to think of the name of the book now. Bauhauser, one of those. He mentions this is about his Chinese literature and what the Chinese knew about gemstones. And they mentioned there the Chinese were cutting them and they knew the difference between a ruby and spinel, but somehow that got lost for 100 years.
Well, it got lost in the British, obviously the British crown, because the Black Prince's ruby is not a ruby at all. That's the one that's, you know,
Yeah.
I always said I didn't want to be the imperial gemologist then, because if she asks, she says, well, your majesty, I have some good news and some bad news. Yeah, it's a natural stone, but it's not a ruby. And it's only been in the ground for how many hundreds of years? And nobody tested it. Nobody thought it was a helmet ornament. They had a hole in it and they plugged it with a ruby because that's what they thought it was.
Right. Yep, you're right. You got time for an interesting story?
Sure.
When I went to do my book, Gemstones of Afghanistan, I was able to get the picture of Queen Elizabeth with the Black Prince ruby. No problem at all. But when I saw the Timur necklace, where the Arabs had 5 of them inscribed their names in it.
And the names on the back.
Yeah.
Yes.
I went to the British Gemological Society and they took me over to the British Museum, who had the piece, and I wanted to get a picture to put in my book, The Gemstones of Afghanistan. And they dug around and finally found the picture.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Not on my.
He's not muted.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I got the picture and brought it back to Hawaii. And a week later, I got a very abrupt British letter. Don't use that picture for anything, whatever you do. And I, so then I called them back and I said, well, what can I do? I want to use that in my book. And they said, well, we can't give you permission. The best thing you do is talk to Queen Elizabeth's jeweler. So I said, oh, how do I do that? They didn't know. Anyway, took me a week or two to finally got a telephone number for Queen Elizabeth's jeweler. And I called him and he says, I'm the jeweler. I'm not the legal person. You got to talk to her barrister. And I says, okay, but he did have the number. So I talked to her barrister and his first question is, are you an attorney? And I said, no. And he said, well, I can't talk to you. So anyway, I says, all I want to know is what to do because I want to get the rights to put that picture in my book. So we fiddled around back and forth and I sent him documents and the picture itself. Probably a month later, we're getting with Chuck and Amy Hutchinson to the point to print the book. And I still didn't have permission. So I sat down one day, took all my papers, which were about an inch thick, and said, dear Queen Elizabeth, I hand wrote the letter. I'm really frustrated. I really want to put this picture in my book, but I can't find it.
You're muted again.
Can you hear me now? It must be going, it must be the website. Okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So anyway, it was only 3 days later that I got a facsimile message from Buckingham Palace reading, thank you for your fixed message of 18 May and for forwarding copies of all the papers. This is to say that permission is granted for you to produce the photographs as proposed, and in view of all the problems and delays you have experienced, I am prepared to waive the reproduction fees on this occasion. However, could the caption please be altered to read, reproduced by gracious permission of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This would then make it absolutely correct and also be much appreciated. Next paragraph. In fact, that the Natural History Museum appeared to hold 2 photographs that belong to the Queen is a matter that will be taken up separately with that body. But in the meantime, as I fear, contributed to your delay. I hope that your publishing can proceed and that publication will be a success. That was best letter I've ever got in my life.
God. You know, it's incredible because we ran into a little glitch like that with Robert when he did the Cheapside Hoard.
Yeah.
Because he went there, took all the pictures. Somebody was there. He couldn't handle them. He did everything else. And then, we thought it was a done deal. And then they said, oh, no, you can't show those. And that was 4 months later. Nobody had said anything.
Yeah, I know.
Nobody even paid any attention to it.
Yeah.
But you have to be really sneaky, tricky when you do that, because anything that's in those museums is like, uh-oh.
Not
And I was
theirs.
trying to figure, they did a gemological symposium on Spinel at Sinkankas.
Yeah, you'll note my signature underneath the article.
I almost didn't get that book because that's the year that they decided they didn't need me anymore. So they took my email off of there. And as a result, I didn't get the notice for the seminar to sign up. I had to get in touch with Anne, one of the gals, the head of the gemological and San Diego Society. And I said, put me on a list from here. So that's how I go in now. But I managed to get a copy of that.
Yeah, good.
From Walt.
Gary, I was going to say, I hope that you mailed a copy of your book to the Queen, because I think that would have been.
I did, and I thanked her profusely.
Glad to hear that.
Fabulous.
So,
By the way, I didn't mention, but what I'm doing now, I was first for 20 years, I went to jewelry stores and took 10 showcases up and filled them full of gems and did 3-day shows. And then after 20 years of that, I started doing roundtables. You may be familiar with that, where the jeweler would get 10 to 20 people sit around a table and we'd pass stones around. And of course, COVID killed that. So right now what I've been doing is I go work with a jeweler and she'll have one couple at a time or 2 couples max, and we'll show stones to them. And that's working quite well. I've had a couple of shows just this last year that we did 40,000 in about 2 hours. So if anybody there is listening and is interested in doing a private showing with any of your customers, I'm more than open to do it. I bring about $2 million worth of stones, which totals about 500 to 600 stones, and different prices. So I'm wide open for it. Just contact me. That's my advertisement.
so when you go to Afghanistan, and when you went this last time, do you bring back gems?
I didn't this time because I was trying to set up that meeting in Dubai that I talked about. So I didn't then, but we had arranged for, as I said, $48 million worth of emeralds. It was unbelievable, the amount of stuff we had to bring from Afghanistan to Dubai, which didn't happen. But I'm pretty well loaded with gems, so I don't need a lot of stuff.
Did you find anything there when you were looking at all those mines?
Yeah, no, actually we didn't find anything, I'd have to admit, except for some small emeralds. Nothing significant at all. And I only stayed up there 2 days actually up in the mines and came back down. So I was rushing around.
Interesting.
So how did they traditionally, Gary, bring these stones to market from the mines? Were there dealer networks that would take them into the capital?
Yes, what usually happens is a relative. Most of the mines are operated by 5 to 7 brothers or combination brothers and cousins, and they share them. Nobody gets any wages. And then they'll have another relative or somebody that they know really well bring them to Kabul. And then Kabul, they were bringing them to Dubai or to India. And also some of them would be taken to Peshawar, Pakistan. And from there, then they got distributed to the rest of the world.
And from a standpoint of historic significance, you said that these mines were very old. Were they part of the Moguls' jewelry?
No. That's the Spinel mines. The emerald mines in Panjshir weren't really discovered until 1977. So they're relatively current.
Yeah, I was talking about Spinels.
Oh, those? Oh, those still today, I'm trying to get a hold of the Tajikistan ambassador and find out if they've changed anything. But as far as I know, it's still somewhat illegal to take gems out of Tajikistan. So they were being smuggled basically to Afghanistan and on to Pakistan. So I'd say 90% of the stones you've seen from Tajikistan have been sold in the Pakistan market and brought back to the rest of the world at this time.
And then the historic mines, were they ever used by the czars or the Chinese affluent, or?
Not the Chinese affluent. The czars had some, Russia had control, and at one time, because they controlled the Soviet Union, and Tajikistan was part of it. But I
Right.
don't think they were, they weren't actively mining that much, because I found that they had one major tunnel in the Kuilao, but nothing else. So they weren't concentrating on the gems, similar to the Ural situation. It's some mining, but it wasn't a serious operation where the government was in there with geologists and equipment and everything else. That hadn't happened.
So the geology formations in Colombia and Russia are very unique to emeralds and the creation of them with the pyrite and marble. So I'm assuming that's the same similar geology that you have.
It's more schist in Afghanistan. We didn't have so much. Had some marble there. They'd follow quartz veins is the way they found most of the material, because they didn't have any scientific equipment to do it with.
And then did they use blasting, or that just wasn't available?
Yeah, no, they've always been using blasting, sadly enough, and it keeps going. But they're also using a lot of fertilizer situations now because they're having trouble getting blasting powder, because they're competing with the military for that, and the borders being closed off made it even more difficult. So they've learned to use the fertilizers and acids and stuff.
Wow.
Now, may I ask you, obviously, that you've been in country for 5 decades. What do you see the future under the Taliban now in terms of flow of gemstones out of the country now? Will that continue?
As I told USAID people the last week before the Taliban came in, it'll continue one way or the other. Every country needs to have economics and goods flowing, so it will continue. But what I see is the ruby mines are down in the Pashtu area. Those will flow out and are starting to flow out again through Pakistan, and the Tourmaline, Morganite, Aquamarines will flow into Pakistan from Nuristan. But I'm seeing the good possibility of a major battle in the spring, because it's heavy winter right now with 4 to 6 feet of snow up in the mountains. But when I was there, I was up till midnight almost every night, talking about how the Panchiris were getting together with the Uzbeks and the Hazaras, and those 3 tribal populations equal almost the same as the Pashtuns. And they're planning to have major battles in the spring right now. And one of my very good friends, I don't know if you're familiar with Ahmad Shah Massoud, who had the Alliance of the North before, but anyway, Salih Registani, who was his defense minister, was also his contact between the KGB and the CIA. And Salih's still working those routes from Tajikistan. And I see no reasons why the US or Russia would really want to back the Taliban. So I don't know how much support they'll give. I'm sure it's going to be something, but I don't think they'll do it on top of the table. The other thing that General Bismillah, who was Massoud's general, also still there. He was the defense minister and was told not to fight during this Taliban situation. But being head of the Defense Department, they actually were able to get about 1/3 of the Air Force, which is choppers and some planes, out to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And so they've also got some air support for their coming fight, whatever it amounts to.
And what would you say would be the Chinese influence? I know that China as a whole has gone into Africa and Burma, you know, and where they can strategically control valuable minerals. See China making a play for any of this?
Yes, they already have. They're really looking. They've had a contract which has never been really put into use for the copper mines. It's some of the largest copper mine in the world, and in the south down there. But also, I think they want to look at the other minerals. I don't know how to figure it out because I've never seen the Chinese any place. They do take over, but it's an economic takeover. They don't usually send in their soldiers and have a fight. And I don't know how that'll work out. They have got a small base now in the Chinese border of Tajikistan, so they can get in by road into the Wakhan area in the north. And they're also claiming or been moving in to Bagram, our U.S. air base in north of Kabul. So they are making a movement. How far it'll go, I don't know.
Do they play much of a role in the infrastructure of the mines and the road systems and
and the road structure, yes, but the mines, absolutely not until this time.
I have a question. I have a
Collie,
question.
Catherine?
I have a question. I'd be curious to know what languages you can converse in.
I was just writing that down. Yeah. What do you speak?
Oh,
Webster?
hey, I'm great at Canadian and British and Australian and BS. I
Oh.
intentionally didn't learn any of the 20 to 30 Afghan languages, but I can get along in a couple of them by staggering through and if I'm in presence of somebody. But other than that, and I didn't really want to learn one because then I'm a spy for everybody else or to everybody else. So
Well, that makes sense. And you don't have to be accused of anything.
yeah.
No, what about, they find red spinel up there and pink spinel. Do they find blue?
No, I haven't had any blue, but I bet you would find some because there's titanium in that area. It's just like the Jagdilic rubies have spots of titanium in them. And if you try to heat treat them, that tends to blow up on you and you get a bad covered ruby on it. But I haven't seen many real reds, mostly a real rich pink is what most of them have been.
That would, but it still takes 20
if you
for
see
that to
red rubies on the market today, I would guess that 98% of them were from Burma, probably, maybe Vietnam.
It's hard to get them out of Burma now, though.
Oh
isn't it? Or
yeah,
did you look
I don't
at
know
them?
about spinels, but the rubies I heard that it's now been written that it's illegal to buy and sell current Burmese rubies.
There was a thing like that on Facebook, somebody warning people about Burmese goods or Myanmar goods for Tucson. Be careful about what they were dealing with.
Yeah. Oh, you speaking of that, Ted Tamilis, some of you probably know Ted.
Ted?
Oh yeah,
Ted Lee,
I sent him
yes.
pictures of that 6-carat ruby and the data, and Ed was complaining to him that if that were a Burmese ruby, it'd be worth over $200,000. You know what Ted said? Ted says that's gemological racism.
Go ahead. It's the same thing with Paraíba tourmaline.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing. Absolutely. Yeah, I have a few of his books too.
Okay, somebody, I see a note there. Can I explain the difference between the Afghan ruby and the Colombian ruby? They're really, really close and a little bit different in the iron. And there may be some other minute chemical differences, but site-wise, you can't tell the difference. And we've got rubies or emeralds that have sold for $200,000, $300,000. The Afghans have one advantage, and they have a lot of crystals over 50 or 100 carats, which you rarely see from Colombia. However, they have nowhere near the production that the Colombian mines have either.
You're talking about emeralds then.
Emeralds, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do they have the stone that that you showed me looks more like the Cuso emeralds, more greenish rather than greenish blue. Is that
Right,
pretty
they vary. What's strange in Panchir, if you start with Hinge, which is the southernmost mine, and go northeast, as you go further northeast, they get lighter and lighter because there's less chrome. So the Hinge mines in the south tend to be almost too dark at times, but the Ceviche ones in the center are they're the brightest ones and the best. Then when you get up to Bismol, then they get almost white. I've actually had some emeralds that were half white, half green because of the lack of chrome.
Whoa. That is, well, chromium is the luxury coloring agent. It colors, you know, your rubies, your emeralds, your alexandrites, for God's sake. You know, I mean, it just that's just one of the expensive gemstones. You know, they're mainly colored by that. I would, and even, you know, jade,
Yeah,
imperial.
right. Mm-hmm.
And then,
That's
Gary, one of the things that I've noticed, just having been around stones for 50 years, is that these Afghanistan aquamarines have just taken over the marketplace for that stone, where they
Mhm.
still now it's like you can't go to a show and not see spectacular arrangements with these aquamarine crystals from the valley. Do you have any sense on how this will drive down the price? Because
Well, right now, because of the Taliban, very few goods are flowing, but you're right. Although I went to Vietnam about 6 years ago, and boy, I bought a couple aqua crystals that were twice the color that I've ever seen in Afghanistan. So they were really rich color.
Hmm.
So I think Vietnam may pick up some of that supply as well. But I don't know what's going on in Brazil either. I'm just not familiar with that.
what I do know about Brazil is that a gentleman who was a multi-billionaire out of Canada came in and bought up a lot of the topaz mines starting 25 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And they started holding all the inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's allowed those crystals to go and become very expensive now.
Mm-hmm.
So you've seen almost a disappearance of that. But you also, what you saw was the blue topaz when it was available, erupting the aquamarine
well,
market.
yeah.
So
That's
it'd be very interesting to see now that, you know, the aquamarines are now quite plentiful from this region, what it really would have in terms of an economic impact on the world, you know, gem stage.
Oh boy, you know what? I'm going to bow out on that one because I really haven't been dealing that much. I know I cut a big 7,000 carat piece into lots of them. I showed you that cat's eye aqua. I think I've got that at 18 a carat with some other aquas. So it's way down from normal. It has inclusions in it, but the lighter aquas are plentiful. You're right, in the market.
Yeah. Now the emeralds, would you, is there a world stage for these now? Are they getting known? I was really excited when you said that they were trying to bring them into Dubai, which is really becoming a major international jewelry center.
Yeah, that of course that all got stopped. You can't get anything in and out of Afghanistan at the moment unless it's few pieces smuggled out through Pakistan. So, and they haven't even come up or started to come up with any policies of how to export or anything. That's the problem the Taliban's going to face. They're an army and they're a terrorist army, and they don't have people to run export things or even the electrical systems or the food systems or the supplies and economy in Kabul itself. So it's not like a military going in that's sophisticated and takes over. They are hiring some of the Pakistani people and bringing them over, but they really don't know how to run a city or a society or a country. So a different world. And they don't have much world support either. So it's going to take a while.
Wow.
So, Gary, during the Afghan war, I know there was a lot of Taliban hiding in the mines. And I know the US bombed almost all the mines. How many mines are still actually accessible? Do you have any idea?
You know what? I'd say most of them. They did a lot of bombing in coast area and other areas, but they weren't really active gem mines. Some people were hiding out in the Nuristan area. That's where your Al Qaeda and ISIS is primarily. But as far as any of the emerald mines in Panjshir, there was never any Taliban hiding out there because that was the last spot they took over. In Jagdilik, in the ruby mines, actually some of the Pashtuns would go to Peshawar and pay some money to the Taliban, and then they would let them operate. And there were Taliban in the area of the ruby mines for the last 2 or 3 years, but they weren't really bothering the miners, and those are all trenches. And to my knowledge, there was no one hiding in trenches or anything.
Okay, yeah, because a lot we heard is, oh yeah, they're bombing all the mines over there, and that's where the Taliban's hiding. And
No,
you have
they
no
were
idea.
there, but they weren't really. They were in different areas mostly. Yeah.
All right.
Well-
Gary, relative to lapis, are those deposits real plentiful through the geology of where those are mined?
They think there's plenty of lapis for many years to come. But there's been arguments. I'm trying to think of the group that Anyway, there was a group that went up there, and I don't know why I can't think of it right away, that went up there and said, well, these are war situations and the government shouldn't be selling lapis. And what it was is one of the relatives of the Minister of Interior, he gave them a license to mine lapis up in Badakhshan, but the leaders up in Badakhshan a few months later just ran him off because he wasn't paying the miners. He wasn't from there, and they took it back. And of course, then they made it illegal to ship lapis, but they had no control over it because it was going through the back door in Pakistan, and bakshish was being paid at the border to ship it out. So it kept going.
Jesus.
But now it's hard to get truckloads out. Lapis is heavy. It's not like emeralds and
No.
rubies. Yeah.
No. Not as easy to put in your pocket.
No, you can put $1 million worth of emeralds in one pocket.
Yeah. I taught Responsible Jewelry Council. Have you heard of them?
Yes, I have. Mhm.
That's
We were trying to
exactly-
work with some of them to do something in Afghanistan.
And it did it. I
Well,
don't know.
we were getting there. It was only like 6 months ago, we got the Minister of Mines in Afghanistan to work with USAID and work with the miners. I mean, it was always a political thing, and they always wanted, 50% duties and et cetera, et cetera.
They want more money.
Right. And the problem in Afghanistan is there is a bakshish system that
Yes.
everybody, if you want to ship something out, you could get your papers from the Minister of Mines, you could get your papers from customs, you could get your papers from export in the bank, but you had to pay a little bit of bakshish. And
Bakshish, by the way, is a bribe. People,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it is, in case
but
you
it's
wanna know.
it's a tax. And
Yeah.
but then they wanted to put a whole tax system on top of it and add 40 to 50%. Well, then they couldn't compete on
And
the
who
world
cares?
market.
Right.
Let me tell you another story. It's funny. I got back here one year. This was about 8 years ago, and I was doing a radio interview up in Wisconsin, and my PR fellow who had arranged it said, "Oh, Gary was held up 6 times with guns this last year up in the mountains," which was true. So the guy asked me about it, and I says, "Well, it's a matter of how you want to look at it. In Afghanistan, these guys popped up with their guns and held them on us. We got off our horses. We sat down, shook hands with them and had tea and negotiated $5 or $10. And then maybe it took 20 minutes and we'd get back on our horse and off we'd go." I says, "I just came around Chicago. These little metal booths popped up. They wouldn't negotiate. They wouldn't give me tea, and they were going to call the guns if I didn't pay them. So it was highway robbery, either way you want to look at it."
Can't get away from it.
No.
God. Hold me hostage. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, depends on your way of looking at it.
Yeah, right.
All in the, yeah, timing and perspective is where you get on and off it. God. How about anybody other questions for Mr. Gary? I thought for sure, you might speak another language, but if I
Well,
worked with Israelis downtown and for a while, and I was a female and I didn't speak Hebrew. And one of the guys who was our client said, so he said, have you learned Hebrew after a while? I said, no, Steve and I haven't. I said, but if I ever do, I'm not telling him.
right. That's better,
I'm not telling him.
If you're a good spy, you don't let anybody know you speak
did
any
that
of the
in my
other
classroom.
languages.
I did that in my classroom. I speak
Yeah.
some Italian and some French,
Yeah.
and I understand that. And I would wait, and I get some students like that. I'd hear them talking. I waited a couple of weeks, and then I would answer some of the things they were saying in their own language, and then,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've
So-
had a couple experiences like that when I knew exactly what was going on.
yeah, exactly. So, anybody else for Mr. Gary?
Just one last question. Obviously, you devoted your life there. You must have a tremendous love for the country. What do you love the most?
The people.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
That's the heart of
The
every
Afghan
country.
people are unbelievable. If you get away from the politics and friend, because for me, I spent all those years up in the mountains. We'd grab a horse and go for 3 and 4 months at a time. There's no motels, no hotels. I never once got refused when it got to be dark to knock on a door, and they'd invite you in and feed you and let you sleep the night, and they didn't want any money for it. It was just unbelievable. And the friendships I've got, I was just telling somebody the other day, I probably could quickly come up with 10 or 12 names of people who would step up and take a bullet for me if somebody was pointing a gun at me. And I don't have one American friend that I would say that same thing for. And I honestly don't know if I could do it if I had time to think about it. It's the way they're brought up. The friendships are a serious thing to them.
Yeah.
And they're out looking for new friends all the time.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow.
That is so cool. And the coolest thing about it is, all of these gemstones that all of them basically, they come from third world countries who are geopolitically and geographically challenged.
You're right. And the sad thing is when they tried, and the big boys are the ones that are leading the group. You got a miner, he's just scratching out a living up there trying to sell the few gems that he has. And they're saying, well, these aren't properly done and properly legal. And that hurts my feelings. So
benefication is something that they've been pushing too, whatever country, South Africa, I don't care. And it's only right that they do that.
Yeah. But I was at a meeting, this had to be 15 years ago, when the Jewelers Vigilant Committee was giving a lecture, right, and talking about how you had to have the address and the name. And I went up to her after the meeting, said, look, there are no addresses up there. There aren't addresses for 100 miles, and nobody's got a telephone number. They wouldn't know how to work it. I said, what do I do? She says, well, then you can't work with those people.
Was that Cecilia Gardner?
It could have been. I don't know.
Ahead of the time,
Yeah. But it's impractical.
And we had a question from Collie. How do they treat their women?
Actually, my wife and I disagree on part of this. If you're in Kabul, it's a little bit different. But if you go up into the villages in the north, the women, they control the money. The man who makes any money, they give it to the wife. They control the kids. They've got the lock of the key to the lock on the house. And I've seen them joke and turn around. They keep them covered more than their money, but they also work hand in hand in the field with the men. So some of this is a little bit stretched. And I've had complaints that the Americans want them to get out of their burqa. And some of the women have said, since I was 12 years old, I didn't have to worry about my hair or makeup. I'd go to the store, and if I disguised my voice, I'd argue with the shopkeeper, and I don't mind wearing it, So there's different stories, but I think in the north, the women are treated fairly well. They don't have overall power when the men try to get together and yak up, but it's not a bad life. But in Kabul, because of the war situation, the women have pretty well been kept in the upper room by themselves and protected in a way, but they don't really have the freedoms. However, speaking of that, but up until, or let's say the last year, I had friends who were fairly sophisticated and had government jobs whose daughters were actually ministers and assistant ministers and getting had their college degrees, and things were really moving in the right direction. But the Taliban, I think, are going to squash that situation.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Yeah.
Mr. Gary?
Yeah, Gary, this is Joe, and most here know Amy. And it caught my ear when you mentioned that you also have a place in Kona, and she's driving from her place in Kona to Hilo
Oh.
this afternoon. So she's had to miss this, and she's not happy about that. In fact, I keep looking. No, she's still not here. But if you're there sometime in Kona, she would love to have some time with you if it would work
Okay.
for you.
Well, send me an email. We just came back yesterday. My wife had a house there, so I married her because she's got a house in Kona. So we go back and forth wherever the party is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I will.
It's Mr. Gary 77 at AOL.com.
Well, I think she's going to send you the check for this anyhow.
Okay.
Gary, she needs your address. And
You want me to give it to you now?
yeah, you can do that, or you can text me, or whatever you want to do.
Okay. It's just P.O. Box 89646, Honolulu, Hawaii 96830.
96830.
And if anybody wants the information, I've been talking about it on our website. It's the gemhunters, plural.com. And all the videos are there, YouTube's, etc.
Okay, and both your books are available?
Yes.
Well,
That just email me. Amazon and I have been having a fit. Yep. The DVD is free. You can just watch it on YouTube. Just go YouTube/Gary Bowersox.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, is that the same one that I showed my class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I love that.
Good.
I love that DVD. Okay. Are we there? Okay. Well, we have certainly enjoyed your presentation and your
Thank you.
presence as well.
Hmm.
And we will be in touch with you. Well, I'll be in touch with you in between too. And if maybe Richard or I come up with somebody who would just love to have the Bowersox Ruby, you never know.
Bring it right over. No,
You
keep
never know.
fishing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Gary, we want to thank you for the
Gary,
presentation
sorry.
for the next meeting.
Sorry.
Very great.
And your stories were very interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, and Gary, by the by, if you can think of anybody else who might like to give a presentation, let me know. 'Cause
Okay,
I'm
will do.
stirring up speakers.
Okay, sounds
Very
good.
interesting, very
Thank you.
interesting. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.